Okay, so we're just waiting for people to join.
Did you guys have a full day of programming yesterday, Alicia?
There was a full day. I didn't make it to many sessions yesterday just because Mondays are horrible for
Yeah.
me, but I had some really good turnout yesterday.
Good.
So let's see here. Oopsie. Alrighty, let's see. Just waiting for people to join. Give them a few minutes. Does your screen look good, Allie?
Yeah, like right now I see the presentation in your box, but it
Okay,
looks
hold on.
good. Now I see both of our boxes and the presentation.
Okay, perfect. So it says that we have 0 watchers yet, so I'm just gonna give it another like 2 minutes.
Okay, sounds good. And if I start to 0 so that you have a recording, that's just fine too.
Okay. All right, well, we're just going to get started and hopefully people will trickle in as they finish grabbing their coffee. So, welcome everybody to Freelance Business Week Day 2, brought to you by Dallas and Denver. My name is Alicia with Creative Planner, and I am super grateful to help organize this event this week. And it is my pleasure to introduce Allie Moore of Creatives Learn Law, and she's going to talk to us about all things, setting up your business the legal way and some steps that you can take to ensure that you are following all of the rules. So, without further ado, I'm going to let Allie give a brief introduction, and then we're just going to jump right in.
Great. Thanks, Alicia. So, like Alicia mentioned, my name is Allie, and I am a lawyer here in Colorado. And my business partner, Ashley, and I serve creatives and creative small businesses. That includes a lot of freelancers, and we work with people on contract drafting and other preventative legal issues that affect their businesses. So here's a picture of me and my partner. Before I opened this firm in 2019, I worked on the Colorado Supreme Court, clerking for a judge, and I worked in the Colorado Attorney General's office. And opening this practice and working with other people who run small businesses, I, for 10 years, ran a wedding photo and video business, has really been like a coming home. This is exactly, for a second, I thought I didn't want to be a lawyer, but this kind of work is really great and I love doing it. So before we jump into the details, I have to always give this disclaimer, which is that when you receive legal education in a presentation like this one, it's always general information and not advice. And the difference between general information and advice is that advice is something that takes into account your situation and tells you exactly what you should do. General information is learning, education, and you have to apply the things that you learn to your own situation yourself. And this is general information, not advice. It's not a substitute for working one-on-one with a lawyer. So if you need advice about your particular situation, you should work one-on-one with a lawyer in your jurisdiction. And then The other thing to know about this disclaimer is that if I love questions, I welcome any questions that anybody has. It helps me a lot if you can keep your questions sort of hypothetical or high level rather than giving a lot of details about your particular situation. But even if you do give details about your particular situation, I can usually flip the answer and make the answer generally applicable. So the plan, the purpose of today's presentation is to do a high-level overview of the big 4 things that I recommend that freelancers and small business owners do to take care of their business's legal needs. I think it can be helpful. The question that I often get is, am I doing everything that I should be doing? And so I think it's helpful to think about this high-level checklist of if you are doing these 4 things, you're probably doing most everything you should be doing. Of course, every business is a little bit different. Different cities might have different business license requirements, different states have different requirements, but these are the big 4. And if you are doing everything on this checklist, you should rest a little bit easier and know that you are off to a great start on keeping your business's legal house in order. So the first thing that I recommend that people do is that they establish and maintain a limited liability entity. So most often you hear people talk about an LLC, but a corporation, it has the same effect. The reason that most small business owners form LLCs is because they are the easiest to maintain. Here in Colorado, it costs $50 to form an LLC. And then once a year, you file this thing called a periodic report, which costs $10. Just cheap, easy, and there are very few rules. If you form a corporation, you are bound by all the rules governing corporations, and there are quite a few of them, including that you need to have a board of directors, and you need to have annual meetings of your company's owners, and you need to keep minutes and agendas for those kinds of meetings. So that is why most freelancers are going to have an LLC and not a corporation. And one thing that you might hear people talk about is S corporations, and S corporations are a little bit different. An S corporation is a tax election, and you can take that tax election as an LLC or as a corporation. So we're talking about entities, usually LLCs. What exactly is a business entity? A business entity is, you hear people talk about like the fiction of corporate personhood. A business entity is a legal entity. That means it is something that lives and exists outside of the person who made it. It is not you. It's legally different from you. It can enter into contracts. It has obligations to pay taxes that are separate from the obligations of the owners. So why do we form business entities? We form business entities because we want to keep the debts and obligations of the business limited to the business's assets. So the best example of when a limited liability entity would just do a great job protecting you is thinking about a commercial lease. So if you rent commercial space for your business and you sign that lease on behalf of your limited liability entity, and then things don't go well in your business, so you decide to close your business, you bankrupt your business, and you have 2 years left in your commercial lease, the only money your landlord can get is your business's assets. It cannot get your personal assets. So that means that if you have to close down your business and you as a business have committed yourself to a bunch of contracts that you can't fulfill, commercial leases, client contracts, anything like that, and you've signed on the dotted line on those contracts as your business and not as you as a person, then those people cannot get your home equity. When you breach the contracts, they can only get your business's assets. So that's why people form limited liability entities. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about limited liability entities, and people think it protects your assets in other ways. We are all personally responsible for our individual actions. So like a good example is if you are a freelance photographer, you are working on location and you're giving a subject instruction and they fall and they break a leg. They could sue you and your business. So it's not going to protect you from those kinds of liabilities because you, the person, are responsible for your actions. So what we do to protect against those kinds of liabilities is we buy insurance. So that's coming up next. But before I do that, I'm going to talk through the nuts and bolts of how you form a limited liability entity. So the first thing that you do when you want to form a limited liability entity is you jump on the Secretary of State website in your state or the state where you want your business to be based out of, and you file articles of organization. Those are the equivalent of the birth certificate for your business. Your business does not exist until articles of organization have been filed. Here in Colorado, like I mentioned, $50 to file articles of organization. We're one of the cheaper states. California, it is like $500, I think, and then you have an $800 a year franchise tax. So anyway, Colorado's a great state to run a business. After you have your articles of organization, you need to go to the IRS's website and get an employer identification number. And both of these things, the articles of organization and the EIN, can be DIY'd. You don't have to pay a website to do them for you. You can do them directly with the relevant authorities, Secretary of State in your state, EIN from the IRS. The EIN is free. What an EIN is it's the equivalent of your business's social security number. Even if you don't form a limited liability entity and you just do business as yourself as an individual, getting an EIN is a good idea because it allows you to fill out Form W-9, which is what, if you're a freelancer, that's what companies are giving you so that they can give you a 1099 at the end of the year. It allows you to fill out a W-9 without using your social security number. And if you are a freelancer, and you have 10 or 15 clients in a year, it's like probably a pretty bad idea to be emailing your social security number around to all those different businesses. So an EIN can be helpful on that front too. But you need it when you have a limited liability entity because you can't open a bank account without an EIN. And one of the key ways that you maintain that separation between yourself and your business is by making sure that your business transacts all of its, expenses, all of its accounts payable go into the business's bank account and not your personal bank account. So you got to get that EIN so you can go to the bank and get an account in the name of your business. After you've done that, you just need to check and see if there are any licenses required to operate your business. Some states just require a general business license to operate a business in the state. In Colorado, we don't have a state level general business license, but some cities and counties have general business licenses. So you just need to see, do I need a business license? Sometimes you need a business license to run a home-based business. Here in Colorado, the only people who I work with that are licensed are people in particular professions. And because we work with creatives, that would be like estheticians, stylists, people that have like a public health angle to their creative business. We in Colorado do not license graphic designers or consultants or coaches, but that doesn't mean that other states don't. So get your business license if you need one, whether it's a general business license or a profession-specific business license. And then the last thing you can do when you're forming an entity is you can create an operating agreement. An operating agreement, unlike the articles of organization, is not anything that gets filed with the government. It's an internal document, and it's the contract between the business's owners. So even if you're the business's sole owner, that operating agreement sets up the division between you, the owner, and your company. And why is that? Why do you need that if you're only one person? Like, you just do what you want, it doesn't matter. It's helpful to have an operating agreement even if you are a one-person business, because it shows, again, that formal separation between you and your business. It's also a document that if you ever wanted to get a loan, people might want to see. It just helps set up formality. So if you are a one-person business, creating an operating agreement is like a bonus task. I wouldn't put this at the top of your to-do list. But if you have a business partner, like my partner Ashley and I, then you absolutely need an operating agreement, because everybody needs to be clear on what happens if they want to get out of the business, what happens if the business needs money, like all of those big high-level decisions. Your operating agreement will provide a framework for how you make those decisions. So, like I mentioned, step 2, after you've formed your limited liability entity, is that you need to buy insurance. And then we kind of have a bonus here, which is pay taxes, because pay taxes is the biggest source of legal liability, like properly collecting and remitting sales tax, properly filing income tax returns. That's kind of the most important and most costly legal obligation that our clients have. So we do want to spend a moment talking about taxes, although We talk about taxes at a high level, and if you need help with taxes, it's an accountant or a tax preparer is who you want to talk to about the nuts and bolts of how to file returns. So we're calling this cover your assets and contribute to the collective. That's our reframing of paying tax. When you buy insurance, starting with insurance, the best news about buying insurance is that insurance brokers, and in particular commercial insurance brokers, don't charge for their time. They get paid on commission when they sell a plan, and they are a wealth of resources. So if you are wondering if you are adequately insured, if you've never considered insurance, and you talk to a broker about what kind of insurance you want, no charge. Find a broker in your area. I have a couple great brokers here in Colorado that I refer people to, and just have some conversations. Ask what policies and what policy limits the broker recommends for you. Ask them to pull some price quotes for you. My big must have for all creative businesses is, if you do any sort of business in person, like you host events or you have an office where people come visit you, you got to have general commercial liability. So general liability, that's this first here under types of liability insurance. General liability insurance, the broker that I work with in Colorado calls that slip, trip, and fall coverage. Like I mentioned, the freelance photographer before, if somebody gets hurt interacting with your business, not because of necessarily, like if you were a doctor, that wouldn't be general commercial liability. If you're a doctor, that's going to be professional, right? Malpractice insurance. But if somebody gets hurt because they slip on the premises of your business, or a light stand falls on them while you're photographing, then you want general commercial liability. Professional or errors and omissions, E&O, that's a different kind of policy that covers you if you mess up in your work product. So let's say that you are a graphic designer and you send a client's design to print, and you made an error in the design. You spend $4,000 printing collateral, and the client comes back and is like, you totally messed up this design, and then you sent it to print. I want you to cover the cost of printing. That could be a claim that you might make against your professional or errors and omissions insurance. So for most of my clients, the general commercial liability is more important, because if they are providing in-person services, then this is just what gets really expensive, right? If somebody gets physically injured, there is no way to predict how much that is going to cost you. Professional errors and omissions insurance, for most freelancers, you have a little bit of a better idea about what your mistakes might cost you. You can do things like include a liquidated damages provision in your contract that says, if I mess up, this is how much I'm responsible for. And a lot of people can self-insure against professional liability. Like if you, let's say that you're a copywriter and your most expensive contract is like $5,000, and you always keep $5,000 in a business bank account, and you know that your clients can't hold you responsible for lost revenue, then on their end, that's what a liquidated damages clause might protect against. Your professional or errors and omissions related risks are pretty low, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't have the policy. It's actually usually a pretty cheap policy for most freelancers and people I work with. But it's important to understand the difference between those two things and make sure that you are insured as you intended and expected to be. There's also, we have a lot of people now that don't provide any in-person services. They do all of their work online, or they save a lot of sensitive data online, like an electronic media or a digital media policy helps cover like technology related risks. So those policies will vary on what they include, but they often include data breach. And so if you have client payment information or client social security numbers or dates of birth or anything sensitive like that, you're going to want to make sure that you're taking good care of that. And you may want a data breach policy. And then electronic media policies will also sometimes cover things related to IP infringement. So a digital media or electronic media policy that talks about intellectual property infringement and provides coverage in those situations could be a really great way for like a design business or copywriter or other people that create IP for their clients to protect themselves. Freelance video editors, anything like that. So commercial property protection, if you use an office space, if you rent an office, you definitely want to make sure that you don't expect that it's your landlord that's on the hook, that you have a good sense of, what your own insurance policies cover, what your landlord's insurance policy covers. A lot of freelancers don't work in offices, especially now, but it's just a consideration. And then other potential coverages you might want to consider if you drive a lot for work, or especially if you have like delivery drivers or couriers who drive for you. You got to have commercial auto too. You can't just assume that if your work includes a lot of driving, you can't assume that your consumer car insurance is going to cover you. If you just occasionally drive for work, you probably don't need commercial auto. But again, that's something to talk to a broker about. These are other kinds of policies. Business income and business interruption insurance are those things that would protect you if you had to close your business for a while. They might pay out to you. If you have employees, you need employer practices liability insurance, EPLI, or employment claims insurance, and workers' comp insurance to protect you against things that can go wrong related to employment. All right, so paying taxes, I'm just going to talk about this at a really high level because like I mentioned, we are not the foremost tax experts, but I think that if you come to the table and you ask yourself, am I doing everything I need to be doing? Taxes has to be on the list of things you're considering. So the thing that we first like everybody to understand is that income tax applies to, I think that the Internal Revenue Code says, all income from whatever source derived. Technically, if you find $20 on the street, that's called treasure trove, and that's supposed to go on your tax return. In reality, people don't put that on their tax return, but I use that illustration because I think it helps sort of conceptualize any income that you're receiving for work that you do that needs to be reported on your income tax return. So income tax, payroll tax, if you are new to freelancing, payroll tax is that thing that will surprise you and make you miserable during tax time if you freelanced before, and you got that your first year's tax bill and you owed money and you've never owed money before. It was probably in large part because of payroll or self-employment tax. So what do I mean when I talk about payroll tax? We all pay about 15 to 20%, depending on the state, of our income to those payroll programs like unemployment insurance, workers' comp insurance, different state programs. Some states have paid family leave that comes through payroll. Then the federal programs, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, FICA, that's FICA tax. Anyway, we all pay like 15, 16, 17% of our income in payroll tax to fund those programs. But if you work for an employer and you receive a W-2, your employer pays half of those income taxes, and then you, the employee, pay the other half, half of those payroll taxes. You, the employee, pay the other half, and it gets withheld from your paycheck, right? It never hits your bank account. It just gets withheld and automatically sent to the IRS. If you are a freelancer and you're getting paid by 1099 and your employer is not withholding. Your client, your company that you work for is not withholding money for you. And payroll tax is not offset by the deductions that offset your personal income tax. So your payroll tax bill adds up super, super fast. And I spend time talking about how quickly that adds up because it's also like a huge contributing factor to why many freelancers need to pay estimated quarterly taxes. If you expect that you're going to owe more than $1,000 in tax at the end of the year, then you should be paying estimated quarterlies, because if you owe more than $1,000 at the end of the year, you are going to be subject to penalties. So a quick way to calculate that is, without even thinking about income tax, if you take 16% of what you think you're going to earn as a freelancer and it's more than $1,000, then you definitely need to be thinking about payroll tax or thinking about filing estimated quarterly taxes. And those estimated quarterlies will include both your payroll and your income tax. Sales tax I list here because I know that there's like a fair number of freelancers that also sell digital products, and states are getting more serious about collecting sales tax on digital products. Sales tax doesn't apply to services, at least in my state, and I believe in most states. But if you sell things like Ashley and I sell template contracts, we need to collect sales tax on those contracts. If you sell like some vector images or things like that, and you sell them through your own website, if you sell them through websites run by other people. I can't even think of the name of any of these websites off the top of my head, but if you sell like stock images through Getty Images, Getty should probably collect the sales tax. But if you have an e-commerce platform that you set up, you got to be thinking about sales tax. These other taxes I have included here because they sort of, people don't know about them. They're they're less expensive. Okay. So most of us have to pay these two taxes, at least in some amount each year. Or at least most of us have to pay use tax, but it's a lot of people don't. So what's use tax? Use tax is what you have to pay when you buy something outside of your city and you bring it into your city to use in your business, and you haven't paid sales tax in your city. You paid a lower sales tax rate, or maybe you ordered it online and you didn't pay sales tax. You as the purchaser are still responsible for use tax. This is getting less common because online retailers are getting better about collecting sales tax. Occupational privilege or head tax. This is the city by city or county by county thing. But basically, you should know that some jurisdictions charge a monthly fee for everybody who works in your business. Like I think the city of Denver charges like $12 a head or something like that. So it's just something you should look out for to see if you might be responsible for it. In the city where I live, there is no head tax, but maybe 6 or 7 Colorado cities have a head tax. Oh, I mentioned estimating quarterly taxes. That's if you are having a hard time doing that, bookkeeper, tax preparer can help you with those estimates. All right, step 3. So if you formed your limited liability entity, you bought insurance and you're feeling good, the next thing you need to do to protect your business is to use contracts that work for you and that have been reviewed by a lawyer, or that you feel really comfortable, with the source that you bought them from. So, why do we use contracts? A couple reasons. First, relationship management. Clear as kind, right? That's a Brene Brown quote. But basically, we don't want people to be on different pages about what the work product is, about deadlines and how they work, about communication policies. So having a contract that really thoroughly articulates those boundaries that are important to you as a business owner and has there's one comprehensive spot that you've given that to your client, and then can refer back to it, is super helpful for managing client relationships. The thing to remember about contracts is that a lot of people don't read them. So you can't just expect people to remember your policies because they appear in your contract. You should be thoughtful about introducing those policies to your clients in other places. I recommend using email templates or like a canned email series. So you have an onboarding email and an invoice reminder email and an offboarding email, and each of those emails for different parts of your client experience have reminders of the key policies that apply at that point in time. So your onboarding email might remind them about deadlines and how you collaborate, what your policies are for taking revisions, those kinds of things. Your payment reminder email might remind them about late fees, or your offboarding email might remind them about the terms that apply to their use of the intellectual property you created for them. That is really useful because it helps manage the relationship in a better way than a fine print contract alone, but you don't need that. The contract is binding whether or not somebody read it. So that's one reason we use contracts, because we want to set up the expectations of the client relationships. We also use contracts to minimize liability. That's the other really important reason. And when I review DIY contracts from my clients, the most common error that those DIY contracts contain is that they did maybe a really good job explaining the relationship expectations, but there's no liability waiver. There's no indemnification provision. There's no liquidated damages provision. We use contracts to assign risk between parties. And as a business owner, you want to choose what amount of risk is acceptable to you. And then you want to put the rest of the risk on your clients. So liability waivers are a really clear example of that. Anytime you provide any sort of in-person services, it can be helpful to have a liability waiver which says your client knows that there are some risks and they assume those risks and they won't sue you if they get hurt doing the activity, participating in the photo shoot, or whatever similar sort of in-person services you might be providing, attending a special event. So liability waivers are the first kind of like key clause that people can use to protect themselves from liability. When you're providing business to business services, you might also want to think about indemnification provisions. Indemnification provisions are those provisions that say things like, if they involve third-party lawsuits. So for example, if a graphic designer is working for, let's say they're working for a, food company, and the food company says to graphic designer, if we want you to indemnify us if there's any third-party intellectual property claims related to the labels that you design for us. So the intellectual or the designer could put in the contract that they would indemnify the food company if any third party sued because there was copyright or trademark infringement related to the packaging. But in default template contracts, like contracts that you're going to use with all of your clients as a freelancer, I certainly recommend that you ask your clients to indemnify you. A lot of clients will sign clauses like that without problem. And it makes sense that, a client might assume the risk of putting stuff out there in the world that you've created for them because your client needs to do things like run a trademark search on their own logo or, make sure that they feel comfortable that you aren't using clips of music that aren't properly licensed, things like that. So anyway, that's the indemnification provision. It can be used for other things besides intellectual property. Like you can use it, at event venues. People who run event venues often have to indemnify the venue, those sorts of situations. But indemnification is about third-party liability, and it's important to be thoughtful about indemnification clauses in your agreements so that you can minimize your business's risk. And then the other liability related clause that I've mentioned a couple times so far is liquidated damages. That is about contract liability. Liquidated damages provisions limit your liability for a breach of contract action. So I think those liability provisions are so important. But we also might want to have provisions in there about like assignment of intellectual property rights, establishing IRS tax status, like explaining that you're an independent contractor, not an employee, setting up deadlines and processes. All of the aspects of a client relationship will be addressed in a thorough contract. And then outside of the client contract space, we also want to think about operating in partnership agreements when you run businesses with others, and then independent contractor agreements for anybody that works for you that you subcontract to. Your client contract might also be labeled an independent contractor agreement because you are your client's independent contractor, particularly, if you're providing business to business services. But the way that I think about these two things differently is the client contract is an agreement that you're going to provide to people who are paying you, and an independent contractor agreement is an agreement that you're going to provide to people who you are paying. All right. So we talked through these must-have contract clauses. One thing that I didn't mention is these cancellation and reschedule policies. So particularly if you have multi-month projects with clients, think about what's going to happen if your client wants to back out of the project midway and have a contract clause that explains what is refundable, what's not refundable, what they're on the hook for, because that can really mess up your workflow. When you sign a contract, like I mentioned, you want to sign it on behalf of your business, and you also want your business to be identified as the party in that. You typically, the first sentence is going to have the contract parties. So our firm is called Allie Moore LLC, and then we have a DBA, doing business as, or a trade name, which is Creative Slur Law. So I want to make sure that if I enter into a contract, like with our web designer, when it identifies the parties to the contract, I'm looking for the party to the contract not to be me. I don't want to be liable under the contract. I want my business to be liable under the contract. So the party to the contract is Allie Moore LLC, DBA Creative Slur Law. And then when I sign, at the bottom of the contract, I'm going to sign Allie Moore, member, Allie Moore LLC, DBA Creative Slur Law. So that member, that's my official title when it comes to the authority that I have to bind the business to contracts. And member is the legal word to describe the owner of an LLC. So here we are on step 4. So Unfortunately, steps 1 through 3 are pretty they're not one and done, but they're like you can take care of them and they're discreet, right? Step 4, the fourth thing we need to do to protect our businesses from liability is act reasonably. This is really broad. It could affect every single aspect of the activities that you engage in as a business owner, as a freelancer. But the reason that I include this really broad catch-all number 4 category is because I like people to remember that the basis of most lawsuits is but lawsuits affecting business owners, we're going to have 2 really common situations arise. One is that you breach the contract. You don't do what you were supposed to do under the contract. And the other is that you act negligently. And negligence is about carelessness, right? If you don't act as a reasonable person should or would, and then somebody gets hurt, that's the legal definition of negligence. So we want to take reasonable care. We want to take reasonable risks. We want to not ignore red flags when we run into situations with clients. Just act like a reasonable person. We all have to take risks as business owners, right? There's no growth without risks, but you want to make sure that you carefully consider risks and that you don't take on risks that don't make sense. So to wrap up, I have a couple tips for working one-on-one with a lawyer. I know a lot of freelancers have never hired a lawyer before. So it can be really helpful to hire somebody who specializes in working with small businesses. And when you work with small business lawyers, most lawyers bill hourly, right? That is the model of our industry, of the legal industry. But there are a lot more business lawyers now that will bill on a flat fee than there were maybe even 5 or 10 years ago. So one thing I do recommend to people is that they explain exactly what they're looking for and see if the lawyer can do the work on a flat fee. And a lot of people use templates, right? They buy templates online and they use that template in their business. The biggest problem that I have with templates, I know a lot of templates include a disclaimer about state law that you need to get it reviewed for the laws of your state. If you are in a state like California, where there are a lot of laws, like in the West here, we tend to have more libertarian kind of states that don't have all that many consumer protection laws. But states like California, New York, Massachusetts, they tend to have a lot of consumer protection laws. And so in those states, it might be really important that you get your contract reviewed by a lawyer in your state. In smaller states, we often don't have that many state-specific laws, but I still think it's worth it to spend time working in the template you purchased to make sure that your contract reflects your business policies. It shouldn't just have some batch of policies that a random internet person decided were the right policies. They need to reflect the way that your contract needs to reflect the way that you work. So if you're going to buy a contract template, I certainly recommend buying a template from a lawyer, because I know that the worst contracts that I see that people have purchased come from other people in the industry, right? So I don't like photographers buying contracts sold by photographers. I like photographers buying contracts sold by lawyers, not just because I'm a lawyer who sells some templates, but because lawyers have a lot of professional standards and a lot of professional regulation. And they are going to face more consequences for selling you a bunch of junk. And they also are going to know better about the liability provisions that are really important to me when it comes to minimizing risk in your business. So those are my tips for accessing legal services. We only work with clients here in Colorado. Some small business lawyers will work with clients outside the state, but we've decided that the rules of lawyer ethics really don't allow us to do that. So we work only with Colorado-based businesses, but we have a lot of educational resources for people outside this state. You can find legal tips all the time on our Instagram, which is at Creatives Learn Law. We send weekly legal tips on our mailing list, which you can sign up for at www.creativeslearn.com. And we also do have some templates and other products that we're working on rolling out. And we always have an educational component with everything that we put out there in the world. So we have video supported templates with my partner Ashley and I have recorded some lessons explaining how to use and edit and understand the contracts. So you might find those helpful. Right now, we're just rolling out a graphic design contract, and we have a wedding photographer contract, and then we have some smaller agreements, and we're working on adding more over the second half of this year. So That's all I have for you today. I hope that you found it helpful. Our main mission in life as small business owners is to make people feel less afraid. I think a lot of lawyers um, tend to scare people, right? A lot of lawyers tend to instill fear in people by making concepts feel inaccessible or making things feel like they are impossible to achieve. And the reality is that when it comes to running a freelance business in a not too highly regulated industry, like most freelancers, right, or content creators or consultants, and when you are running a business like that, it is absolutely manageable to understand your business's legal obligations and to take care of them. So I hope that you found this list helpful because I hope it gave you a sense of comfort so that you could either say, oh, I'm doing those things, or, oh, I can be doing those things. So that's what I got for you. Hey, Alicia.
Hey, thank you so much for your presentation. It was great. I've been kind of monitoring our chat over here in Hey Summit, and there's no questions, but I just
Great.
posted a great session. There was a hello from Miami and a couple other folks watching. So I guess, is there anything else that you want to close out with? Are there any, promos or offers that you would like to let everybody know about?
Yeah, if you're here in Colorado and you need a lawyer to draft your contracts, we would love to chat with you. If you're not in Colorado, I would love to have you sign up for our email list so that we can keep you informed about those templates that we're rolling out. And we also send once a week business law tips. So hopefully you'll find those tips helpful. But that's all I've got.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. It was great. Do you want to? I'll put the website in the chat for everybody so you can find Allie over at
Oh,
Creatives
yeah.
Learn Law. And she's on Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest. They're everywhere, so you can find them. I'll put the website in the chat,
I think I
and
got it, Alicia, maybe.
oh, you got it. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
All
All
right.
right,
Thank you so much for having me.
all right. Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
All right, bye.